Hello friends. So today we're going to talk about when you feel super overwhelmed and you have a ton of things to do and you just really can't get yourself to do the things that you need to do, even though you have due dates and they're really important. So this might be work tasks, it might be home tasks, whatever you need to do. This video will teach you how to get the things done even when you feel overwhelmed. So this is very kind of close to my heart right now because honestly, I feel a little overwhelmed right now. I have a full coaching practice. I have 3 kids and it's summer. And I am currently pursuing a doctor of psychology as well, on the side. And it's sometimes a lot of tasks. It's a lot of things that I need to get done. And I find that this is something that a lot of my clients struggle with as well, because typically they have kind of tech jobs that have a lot of tasks, have a lot of work, they work long hours. Particularly my clients at Amazon struggle with this quite a bit. I think it's because at Amazon you need to do a lot of writing, which is often when we really get the most blocked, because for a lot of us, writing feels hard. We know it's time consuming and we know that, it's just gonna take a lot of effort. And this is the key here to overwhelm, is that we often feel overwhelmed when we have a lot of things to do and we perceive them as a lot of effort. And at the same time, we feel like we're constrained on time. So maybe this is you. Maybe you have a job where everyone's just scheduling meetings with you, and you don't have any focus time. And every time you block out focus time, somebody schedules a meeting and you're like, I need to write this strategy proposal, but I have no time to do it because my calendar looks like a block of Swiss cheese and there's only tiny little increments. And so I feel you. I have this experience as well. My calendar kind of looks like Swiss cheese as well. And so oftentimes I have these gaps in my calendar where it's 30 minutes or an hour, and I could be doing something during this time, but a lot of times I kind of engage in things that aren't that useful. You can probably relate. And at the same time, I have this to-do list of things I need to get done, and they need to be done in 3 weeks. There's a due date. This stuff needs to be turned in, or this keynote speech needs to be written, and it just needs to get done. And so I'm gonna teach you the technique that I used when I was the most overwhelmed. And this was back in grad school. When I was in grad school for psychology, I was writing my research. It was during the pandemic, and I was essentially homeschooling 3 kids. They were at home. It was pandemic times. We live in Washington. There was a long quarantine. Schools were closed. And so, and at the same time, I had my coaching practice, of course. And so when you're working, going to school, and doing psychology research, and you have these 3 kids at home, sometimes it feels like you're short on time. And if you've ever written a dissertation or a thesis for graduate school, you know that it can be really overwhelming because it's a really heavy lift. There's a lot of moving pieces and there's a lot of writing, there's a lot of things to do. It's a huge project that oftentimes it's difficult to engage in because it just feels like it's overwhelming. And you feel oh my gosh, I might write the worst dissertation ever. So let's get to the technique that I use when I feel overwhelmed to get myself to do the things that I need to do. First of all, I want to add a little caveat here. So when I was younger and before I really had a psychological education and before I was a coach, I used to have a lot of judgment when I wasn't completing my tasks in the efficient manner that I thought I should be. And so if I wasn't doing something in a kind of way that I thought needed to be done, and maybe I was procrastinating, maybe I just wasn't being as efficient, I would really judge myself. I'd be oh my gosh, I'm being so lazy, what is going on? Come on, chop chop, get the stuff done, time's a wasting. But now, as I've worked in the psychology field for several years, I have a psychological education, I realize that this type of judgment is really, really detrimental to you. So if you are in a position where you're feeling overwhelmed and you're not getting the things done that you should be getting done, do not judge yourself. Do not think that there's something wrong with you. Do not think that you're lazy. basically what's happening here is very, very normal, and it's the way that the brain functions. This is how the brain is supposed to function. And there's a couple of things that are happening here. So you have a lot of tasks. So that's making you feel stressed. Typically, there's also a time constraint element. So stress actually makes you want to engage in more kind of short-term thinking. So when you feel stressed, and especially if the stress is quite high, you often feel negative emotion. And what happens is that you want to engage in kind of like a short-term reward because your negative emotion is so high. And so what you will do is you will typically procrastinate with something that makes you feel good in the moment. And the key here is to not judge yourself about the procrastination in the moment. The key here is to stop making yourself feel so bad, okay? So when you're overwhelmed, when you're stressed, you feel really bad, and it's hard to get yourself to do anything from that negative emotional state. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna use something called the Pomodoro Technique. And we're gonna use an app called Focus to Do. And what this will do is it'll help you realize that the things that you need to do aren't so big and scary after all. They can be broken up into small chunks, and you do not have to exert as much effort as you thought you needed to previously. At the same time, we're going to kind of give you small rewards along the way so that you can keep going. Because if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're not able to engage in the things that you know you should be doing, that it doesn't mean that you're like actively choosing to be lazy. It typically means that the reward and the risk perceptions in your brain are a little bit off. So you're not kind of perceiving enough reward from the tasks, and you're also perceiving it as a very kind of time intensive and difficult task. So you're perceiving a lot of risk in the task, especially if the task is something that's evaluated by others. You typically perceive that there is a high potential for failure. So what we want to do here is we want to lower your perception of risk, we want to raise your perception of reward, and we want to lower your perception of energy expenditure. So if you watched my other videos, you know the brain is kind of lazy, like it likes to save energy. So if we perceive something as very time consuming, very energy consuming, we're not going to want to do it. So we need to break it up, we need to make it easy, kind of digestible little pieces. And the analogy I like to use here is like, think of if you're going for a run. Okay, and most of us structure our work in a similar way as if we were to say, I'm just gonna go on an infinite run. Like, I'm just gonna, run and like hope for the best and run as long as I can. And for most of us, like, doing that would make us not want to go on the run. Like, I don't want to go for an infinite run, and I even like running. So, like, that sounds horrible. And so the key here is that we need to have a start time and a stop time, and we need to have breaks. So you know that typically when you go for a run, if you take like a short little break, you can probably run longer, or if you get one of those gels, or if you get water, etc., right? So what we want is structure here. We need structure to get ourselves to do things. And this is where the Pomodoro technique is very useful. The Pomodoro technique is essentially almost like a Tabata, but for like work. So if you exercise, Tabata is like 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off. It's like a 2-to-1 ratio. Pomodoro isn't necessarily a 2-to-1 ratio. You can kind of make it whatever you want, but I think the traditional is either 20 minutes work, 5 minutes rest, or 25 minutes work, 5 minutes rest. And what I like to use is an app called Focus to Do. I have it downloaded on my Mac. It's free to use. I think there's a premium version, but I don't use that. So I'm going to show it to you all here, and I'm going to kind of show how I use it. And typically I actually only use this app when I have a lot to do and I feel overwhelmed. When I feel like I have enough time and not as many tasks, I'm pretty good about getting things done. But this is like my go-to to kind of fixing that overwhelm problem and kind of getting unstuck in that kind of like, I don't have enough time, I can't do this, like this is just too much kind of perspective. Okay, so what I do is I put in my tasks. And what you can do here is you can kind of put in your task, and you can choose how many little clocks each task will take. So a big task might take like 8 clocks, a small task might take 1 clock. Each clock is equivalent to 25 minutes of work and 5 minutes of rest. So you can obviously change that. If you are just getting started, this technique really helps train your focus. So if you're hoping to train your focus, this is also incredibly effective. What you want to do though is if you're feeling like you're not able to work for 25 minutes straight without distraction, you want to start lower. So maybe you start with like 5 minutes of work. Maybe you start with 10 minutes and then you kind of do the 5 minutes rest, or how much rest you think you need, and work your way up. The 25-to-5 ratio works really well for me, but it might be different for you. So essentially what I do is whenever I have 25 minutes, well, 30 minutes because you want the rest as well, I engage in one of my tasks. So I take one of my tasks and I go in, I click the little timer here. It starts counting down and it actually shows it on the top of your computer as well. And you go in and you just work as much as you can on that particular task. And it's super freeing because you know that there are boundaries to your work, that you get this break afterwards and you don't have to like, sink into this like deep void of work and not know when you're gonna come out. And it's so good at tackling kind of that overwhelmed feeling because I know that it's okay. It's just 25 minutes. I just need to get this 25 minutes in and then I'll be done. And it honestly makes me so much more efficient, probably because of Parkinson's Law, which states that work expands to fit the time increment you give it. So essentially what I've been doing is I've been giving myself 25 minutes and I've been able to get a lot done in those 25 minutes because it feels like almost like a sprint, right? Like if you were asked to sprint for an infinite amount of time, you would not run very fast. But if you were asked to sprint for only, 2 minutes, you would run a lot faster. So I think it's like a similar concept here. I just want to get as much done in the 25 minutes, and then I know I get the 5-minute break. Word of advice, take the 5-minute break. Sometimes this technique works so well that you're like, wow, I'm crushing it. Like I'm going to just do another 25 minutes. The brain doesn't typically like that. The brain likes rewards. So I would be really wary of skipping the 5-minute break. I oftentimes get out of my desk, walk around a little bit, do, like a small chore or like something that I've been meaning to do, maybe get more tea, and during the 5 minutes. And whatever works for you, you do that. You can watch a YouTube video, etc. But take the 5 minutes, do not ignore the 5 minutes. You need that break and it will make you more efficient in the long run. And think of it this way, like we know from fitness training, from running, that structure is incredibly important. And it's fascinating to me that we don't apply the same structure to our work. And for most of us, work is more important than fitness. Like most of us are not professional athletes, unfortunately, but we don't apply a similar training structure to our focus or to our time or to our work. And this will allow you to learn the focus that is needed to get the results that you need to get, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed. So I hope that this was helpful. I will link the tool that I use below, and please post any questions that you have about this technique. I really encourage you to try it, and I think it's an awesome way of kind of overcoming overwhelm. One more thing that I'd like to mention that it helps with is that if you really put all of your tasks in here, you actually can estimate how much each task will take you. And then you kind of have a guesstimate of how long all of this work will take you. And I actually find that really useful because typically when I don't make these estimates in my brain, like it feels like the work will take me infinite time. Like this is just infinity. Like, and honestly, like if you have perfectionistic tendencies, the answer may be infinity. Like I'm writing a keynote lecture right now on the psychology of employee retention. And I could honestly spend a year writing that if I wanted to. Like there's endless resources. Like I could keep talking, right? And when I put this into the focus to do, and I actually give it the like amount of clocks that I think is a fair estimate for this project, and I do like to kind of give it a little bit less clocks than I think, just to kind of see if I can get it done in less time. And I always tell myself like, hey, if the first version of this isn't as good as you want it, you can always add another clock. It's fine. But done is better than perfect, right? And so I gave myself only 4 clocks for this retention lecture, and I'm kind of trying to see if I can get it done in the 4 clocks. And it makes me feel so much better, because in my mind previously, like I stated, my kind of perception of this task was like infinity. Like, this is going to take me forever, which is super silly, but it's kind of the way the brain works. And now, like, I know, like, hey, like, I can get this done in like about an hour if I work really focused. It might not be the most optimal version, but it will be done. And then typically, if you're anything like me, you'll probably kind of go over it and make it a little bit better. But once something is done, you typically feel so much less overwhelmed, and you feel a lot better, and you can kind of make things more like you want them to, and not be kind of going through that stress spiral that kind of blocks you from actually doing the work. Okay, so I hope that this was helpful. Let me know if you use this technique, and I'll see you all next week with another video.